I don't know if you can see the slight glare of sunlight. It's the first sunlight I've seen in about 3 days. It's been pretty wintry here, but it's nice, even if it is washing out my face a little bit. Sorry about that. Let's get it started. And I have both a piece of art and an epigraph for you today. I don't normally do that, but my topic is regulation or runaway technological change. This very much builds on what we talked about together last week, which was the question of whether a possible post-Trump era in American politics would perhaps still be a post-truth age. And in that talk, I really focused on the social conditions that sometimes or intermittently produce hostility to expertise and deferring to those who are more knowledgeable than you. That often ends up being an elite of one kind or another in a democracy. And I suggested that the perhaps potential fading away of Donald Trump as the dominant force in one of our two main parties might not end the post-truth era in American politics, because Trump, although he has certainly spread his fair share of lies and reduced the commitment to any kind of minimal epistemic standards for his political party, is not solely or uniquely responsible for the forces that are diminishing our willingness to listen to those who claim to have superior knowledge in democratic politics in the 21st century. And I suggested that things to do with economic opportunity and perceived class division, the growth of a knowledge economy, and the idea of having a degree as being a key qualifier for a realm of privilege. And if you don't have that college degree, you are much more precarious in today's economy, as well as the degree of tension between common sense and what experts tell us, and the perceived bias, both political and religious, in the current state of knowledge and culture, as opposed to ordinary common sense belief, that all of that is contributing to a regular or intermittent move in a democracy in the direction of populism. It's not the first time, it probably won't be the last time. And having some understanding of the forces then that produce populist backlash can help us to understand also, if we want to address those forces, what we can do. And celebrating the difficulties that the liar in chief is experiencing may be appropriate, but thinking that we will exercise our politics of the mendacity, of the disinformation, of the disconnect between policy making and expertise on the issues about which policy is being made, that is not going to occur simply because one person's star fades, right? And I mentioned briefly the idea of technology and the idea that we are in the middle of, I want to say, a once in a millennium transformation in our communication and intellectual technology, and that transformation is disrupting the way we communicate, the way we relate to each other socially, the way we process knowledge, even our emotions. And that we need to also think about what it's doing to our relationship to knowledge and the truth. And here I don't think it's benign or beneficial force. I think it's a double-edged sword. It has some good consequences, and I'll get into that. But the digital media revolution, the deeper revolution in computational technology, the growth of social media, artificial intelligence, machine learning is certainly one of the forces we need to be thinking about. And in particular, the question I want to raise in today's lecture, and as I think you may have heard, Amy has me on somewhat of a short leash today. I've got to stop after 55 minutes so that I don't infringe on movie night. So this will probably spill over into next week as well. The issue I want to raise is the fact that all of this technological change is occurring at a breakneck pace, incredibly accelerated, and we are doing very little to regulate it. And so the deep question is, do we just go where runaway technological change takes us, or do we attempt to, in some way or another, manage, influence, regulate, steer that change? And so I've got an image here from Paul Klee, the great mid-century German expressionist artist. This is actually, I believe, from the mid-1920s, Angelus Novus, the New Angel. And for the epigraph, I have a famous, oft-used quotation from Walter Benjamin's essay, Theses on the Philosophy of History. This is what he says in reaction to this painting. A clay painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he's about to move away from something he is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past, where we perceive a chain of events. He sees one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing in from paradise. It has caught in his wings with such a violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress. And obviously Benjamin is writing at a moment where radio has completely transformed political communication. If you know his biography, you know he's a German Jew in Berlin and Frankfurt, and that he ultimately is a victim of a Nazi death camp. That's where he dies, how he dies, and that he's thinking in particular of the Nazi seizure of power and what it means for Germany. But I do think that there is a very strong relevance to this kind of analysis to our current historical moment, and that the transformation in technology, especially the technology of communication that we're going through, is comparable but even more extreme than what was occurring in the early 20th century, now in the early 21st century. So I wanted to start with that image, that quote, those ideas, the idea that progress can be actually a catastrophe if it simply pushes us where our technology can go, as opposed to us trying to exercise some influence over where our technology takes us. So now, just briefly to review, and I promise I won't go through all of this again, but last week we concentrated on Sophia Rosenthal at the University of Pennsylvania and her book Democracy and Truth, A Short History, written in 2018 to build on her earlier work on the history of ideas, especially the history of common sense. And the lesson that Rosenthal teaches is that we in a democracy go through different phases, a kind of pendulum swing in which at points the technocratic or elite determination of the truth is accepted. We are happy to learn from those who have studied specific topics in depth. And to use their wisdom and knowledge to guide our political opinion formation. And then there are other periods in which that effort to teach the populace backfires and produces a populist backlash in which we are angry at, resentful of, hostile to, unwilling to listen to the pedantocracy of the talking heads who claim to know so much, but nevertheless may appear to be biased in favor of certain ideas and against other ideas, may appear to be corrupted by power or wealth, just doing the bidding of their masters, may appear to be unfairly advantaged, that if the access to education is reserved for a specific class or a specific sex or a specific kind of person, race as well, then why should we have to listen to them? They're just lording their qualifications over us, which already create unfair advantages for them. Similarly, the degree to which what the experts have to tell us departs from our common sense, right? Makes us have to accept things that we have no everyday evidence for. And especially if that knowledge appears to be so complex and specialized that it dizzies us. It makes it impossible to understand it. We're cognitively overburdened. You might understand E equals mc squared, but do you understand the general theory of relativity, let alone quantum mechanics? And if not, what in the world are you going to do with quantum computing, right? And so if the knowledge is simply too specialized to be translated into a form that ordinary people can understand and that in some sense or another comes to connect or revise their common sense, right? If those are just two completely separate realms, it becomes tempting to say, I'm just not going to listen. I'm going to stick with my common sense. It's gotten me this far. It can't be all bad, right? Even more difficult is when the truth, or what experts and those who have greater knowledge maintain, is either inconvenient or disagreeable, suggests things that you don't want to hear. Again, it makes it easier to push back. And then there are also more historically specific and contingent sources of tension between what everyday people think and between and what experts are maintaining. And the one I want to focus on today, which I mentioned but did not focus on last week, is when the media system and the public sphere are disrupted by new technology. And that allows for disinformation to spread, but it also means that ordinary people don't yet have developed norms and strategies for regulating and understanding and filtering the information that is circulating through the restructured and disrupted public sphere. So that's where I want to focus today. I want to start with the idea that we are in the middle of one of the most important revolutions in the technology of communication, and more broadly speaking, intellectual technology. We are inventing machines that, in at least certain realms, think faster and maybe better than we do. You probably have seen the recent spate of stories on chatbots. So we now have new programs, algorithms, artificial intelligence, machine learning systems that you can just ask a question to, and it will answer in a way that seems very much akin to the way in which a person would answer, including fabricating narratives at points, right? Spinning. And so, right, this revolution is not stopping. If anything, it is accelerating. And it is affecting us in all kinds of ways. One of the ways it's affecting us, and this is where I'll start, but not where I'll stop, is that it's changing our public sphere. And the key idea here, and I'm drawing the term from Zeynep Tefekci, who's a Turkish and now American scholar, teaches at the University of North Carolina. I know I've mentioned to you before Twitter and Tear Gas, which I think is a really excellent book. Tefekci has, since completing this book about 5 years ago, changed her mind on some of these issues. But I think that the central concept of the networked public sphere, which she's not alone in theorizing, but I think she gives us a very good guide to it, is intact, even with some revisions about the fragility of networked protest. So the first thing to notice is that our publics are being reconfigured through the assimilation of digital technologies. And our networks, right, and in particular, our way of thinking the public, whenever we, right, try to do something for the public, write a book, write a symphony, give a lecture on YouTube, etc., we have to have some sense of who that public is. And, you know, is it an English-speaking public or not? But what level of education does it have? Is it a racially homogenous or diverse public? We in the process of constructing what it is we hope to address to the public, also envision or discursively construct that public. And that depends in part on the technology available to us. And so if it's only a print media public sphere, our communications only travel as far as the newspapers, the books, the sheet music that we print travels, right? If it becomes a broadcast media public sphere, then the media travel further. They travel electronically through the airwaves. If it's a networked public sphere, the degree of connectivity is still greater, right? And so the idea of the Russians setting up a, quote, troll farm, right? A whole army of people to work in English and put things on Twitter and Facebook to influence American public opinion, right? That's inconceivable absent a networked public sphere, a public sphere networked by digital technology. And what this points to is that there are new affordances, is the technological speak, for what this new technology allows you to do, what it affords you the opportunity to do, right? And so you might think of just the technological capacity here. And among the technological capacities, which I want to emphasize, the new public sphere allows practically anyone to broadcast, to publish, to attach to a network via a social media outlet and see how many people they can attract to the idea that they're trying to communicate. It also allows for vast information to be accessed basically freely, right? We have to pay for the device and the electricity, but we don't pay for Google to search practically all of the information that humankind has generated and to present it to us in a way that allows us to quickly gain access over it. I think many of you know that my partner is a medical doctor, and one of the frustrations that she and her colleagues have these days is that the patient comes to the office having attended Google Medical School, right? They've searched on their device and figured out everything they can about their condition or their symptoms or their medication, and they think they know as much as the doctor knows, right? And so On the one hand, that's frustrating to the doctors. On the other hand, that's just a transformed universe. I've got it down here under point 6, right? That up until 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the fairly constant condition of humanity has been one of information scarcity. And today, the condition is information superabundant. So that's another thing that this technology does to us. And of course, the technology networks us. So it makes it much easier for us to be in touch with, in communication with, engaged with, and influenced by people at great distances, right? So the Russians influencing our elections, or somebody in Romania reading an article that I haven't even published, but that I put on a website for sharing academic research and being interested in my ideas, and me figuring out that I'm interested in their ideas. And it starts a two-way dialogue between us, right? That never could have happened before. And by the way, this technology is also ubiquitous. You have this survey I do when I get to these topics in my classes at college, and I ask my students, so how many of you go to bed with your phones, right? And the common practice is to put them under their pillows, and depending on the class, it's usually 2/3 to 3/4 of my students. And then I ask, how many of you wake up in the middle of the night to check your phone? And the answer I get is sometimes 30–40% of my students, right? And these are standard kind of representative figures for people their age. And so the idea that we are constantly connected, tethered, as they say, to technological devices that both allow us to network with distant people and afford us the opportunity to present ourselves online, to curate an image of ourselves, and to dwell on whatever information we want to be dwelling on. And by the way, the outlets that we use to access the World Wide Web, the applications, are running algorithms that rely on machine learning and that influence the way we think, the way we feel, the way we pay attention, and of course, what we think we know. All of this then is part of the new networked public sphere. I'm going to now drill down on a few more specific features. The expansion of weak ties is something that Tefekci concentrates a lot on. She's interested in social movements that try to come from outside of the mainstream of political parties and change politics. So the civil rights movement, the suffragette movement would be two critical examples from 20th century American history. And one of the things she notes, and I'll use an example here, right? I went to high school in Richmond, California, and I have a handful of close friends who I remain in touch with from high school. But I have a whole bunch of people I knew from playing football and running track and participating in academic debate and student government and just from classes who, up until a few years ago, frankly, I had no contact with, right? You know, and that's pretty standard. I moved away, I came to the opposite coast, but not only that, some of those people became nurses and mechanics and physical fitness trainers. Other of them became high school teachers. We don't intersect professionally, geographically, or socially. So we don't have a lot of contact. But around 5 years ago, I set up a Facebook account. And over the last 5 years, around 50, 60 of those people have gotten back in touch with me, right? And this is just an example of the way in which this new technology lets people who wouldn't otherwise probably be in touch at all be part of each other's weak social tie network. The strong social networks I have with my close friends, my family, my professional colleagues, maybe, those have not been as transformed perhaps by this new technology, but the expansion of the weak tie network has really changed. And the then additional factor closely related to this is that we've got cross-cutting networks, right? And so I can be in touch with those school teachers and physical therapists, et cetera, not on a regular basis, but through the social media. And the result is that I'm in touch with people who are in different places, in different stations, in different careers than I am. And so my network crosses over into other social circles than it might have crossed into. The decline of gatekeepers, and I'm going to use an example here of a colleague and friend of mine, Andrew Rosenthal, who was an editor for the New York Times for over a decade. And so used to be the case, if I wanted to reach a large audience, well, I maybe would have tried to get something published in the New York Times, in the op-ed section. And then I would have had to convince Andrew Rosenthal or one of the other editors to publish it, right? And Andrew Rosenthal, I think, is very honest and forthcoming and admits that when he edited the Times, he was not paying as much attention to issues of racial justice as he should have been, right? And so the Times had a rather narrow, rather homogenous, rather mainstream take on issues of racial justice. And in the old mass media broadcast public sphere, that meant most of us were not thinking about these issues in much depth or with much care. And then the new networked public sphere broke out. We now have these things with us everywhere. And so when an African American is assaulted by the police, it's much more likely that it will be recorded. But not only that, it can be broadcast. And for the most part, it isn't broadcast originally on the New York Times or CNN. It's broadcast on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or now TikTok, right? And so eventually, if the posting becomes viral, maybe the New York Times, CNN have to pay attention to it. And what this means is that the elites who used to control access to the most important media enterprises and thereby to channel our attention into the mainstream of political discourse have lost much of their power to do that. And so the public sphere is now much more wide open, wild, unregulated, an anything goes kind of environment. And that has had obvious benefits. And I do want to emphasize the benefits, right? And so Black Lives Matter could not have occurred under the old media system and public sphere. Hashtag Me Too, the Sunrise environmental justice movement. We can talk about a lot of important social movements that have taken root in this new media public sphere, perhaps the Arab uprisings, perhaps some of the color revolutions would not have really been able to take hold and succeed to the degree that they did without this new public sphere, without the affordances of this new technology. But it is a double-edged sword. And I want to be as clear as possible about this. I'm sure that Andrew Rosenthal and the New York Times would not and have not published articles that say that the COVID-19 vaccine is actually a diabolical plot on the part of deep state governmental officials to get microchips into your bloodstream in order to be able to surveil you, monitor you, maybe even control you. And I hope you're smiling when you hear this, because it's absurd, and I need to say that from the outset. This is obvious, gross disinformation. But having said that, it is also something that is believed, apparently, by millions of people. And the result is that those people are not taking the vaccines. And the result of that is that 1,000 to 2,000 people are dying in the United States on a daily basis, when probably it should be only about 20% or less of that number dying, right? And so thousands of people are dying unnecessarily every week because of disinformation circulating through our new public sphere. And not only that, I know you guys are on lockdown right now. The society as a whole is suffering because we are not achieving sufficiently widespread immunity to really stop the virus from spreading and mutating, right? And so that's just one example of the way in which the decline of gatekeepers, the creation of new networks that connect people who are loosely connected to each other, allows kooky ideas to spread, and the people who are susceptible to them to connect to each other, to pass these ideas along, and to constitute a sufficiently large number that the ideas gain the credibility that comes with large numbers of co-believers. So now to come to this sixth point, which I've already previewed, but I want to drill down on it for a moment. I'll just point out to you, right, that for the vast majority of human history, the vast majority of human beings have been illiterate, right? Which meant if you wanted to acquire any knowledge that was written, you had to seek an intermediary to read it for you, which meant that churches and religious organizations and states and political leaders and elders required a great deal of power to give you access only to the knowledge that they wanted you to have access to. That even after the revolution in the printing press and the publication of books and newspapers, for a long time they were extraordinarily expensive. And so only the rich and elite gained access to that content. That even more recently, with widespread literacy in the developed world, the idea of gaining access to expert knowledge still meant you had to go to the library and find the right resources and do the research. And that today, right, we're in an inversion of that world. That's a world in which knowledge and information are scarce, in which they're hard to come by, in which it's time consuming, energy consuming, expensive to get them. And now, boy, all you got to do is open your phone, push the big G, and you are on the information highway. And in a second or a millisecond, you're going to have access to thousands of pieces of information. And so this, I think, is quite remarkable, potentially revolutionary and transformative. And by the way, part of what I want to emphasize probably next week, but I'll preview it today, is that there are very democratic, very useful, very helpful things that we could be doing with this technology. But to realize those potentially revolutionary possibilities, we have to steer the technology and use the technology in the right way, as opposed to being like Benjamin's angel of history, just pushed along wherever it will take us. And so, yes, the idea that we live in an era of information superabundance is wonderful in basic respects, but it is also the case that therefore most of us are cognitively overburdened. There's too much knowledge, too much information for us to understand. And therefore, one of the coping strategies that we use to try to manage this inordinate supply of potential information is what various technology scholars and people who study knowledge, epistemologists, call homophily. And I'm sorry for the jargon, homophily, love of the same. You choose to believe people who already believe what you believe. You seek out sources that confirm your prior understanding and knowledge. And so one of the things then that this superabundance of information has done is to make us much more likely to be segregated into knowledge. And the idea that we are now in filter bubbles, in silos, I think is characteristic, a way of coping with the amount of information that we have access to now. The dissemination of unvetted information. Obviously, I've mentioned this to you many times before, right? And whether it's that the 2020 election was stolen. Obviously, the president or former president of the United States saying that means that it's going to get a lot of attention from mainstream media. But the idea that the US government is just a facade for a deep state controlled by Democratic Party operatives who are in charge of the levers of power and in fact quite evil, Satan-worshiping pedophiles, and that Hillary Clinton is one of the main beneficiaries of this deep state, and that she and Bill are themselves pedophiles, and so that she runs a child trafficking network out of a pizza parlor in suburban Washington, D.C. Again, I hope in one sense you're smiling. It's so absurd. It's so fantastical. It's so fabulous that there's no way that anybody can believe it, except that apparently millions of people do, right? And again, the idea of the number of people believing something, giving the thing itself credibility, irrespective of whether or not there's a shred of truth and an iota of verifiability behind it, is part of what this new networked public sphere does to the transmission of knowledge and mis and disinformation, stuff that is misunderstood and stuff that is deliberately fabricated in order to mislead us. And I noticed a few minutes before I came on, turning now to point 8, that Elon Musk had reversed suspending the Twitter accounts of 6 journalists who had written critically about his takeover of Twitter or about Tesla or about him. And so I suppose that's a good thing, but this gets at something that I think is essential about this new public sphere, which is that this new public sphere is carried by media systems that are privately owned commercial enterprises. Some of them are publicly held, but many of them are dominated by individuals, new media barons. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg come to mind as perhaps the most important of these individuals. And so that there are new choke points in the attention economy. They're not the old ones. It's not the editor at the New York Times and his biases. It is maybe what Zuckerberg or Musk or somebody else thinks is or isn't appropriate for us to hear or know, or just based on their current mood, who it is they want to punish or promote. And I'll now pivot to the idea that it's not just individuals making these decisions. It's not either Andrew Rosenthal or Elon Musk. It's algorithms. And an algorithm is a form of technology a program that relies on artificial intelligence and machine learning to accomplish certain ends. And in the new media sphere, the social media sphere, the primary objective is to keep the viewer's eyes on the screen, to capture their attention, to mine their data, to see, that is, how they behave, what links they follow, which potential pieces of information engage them and keep them there for a while, which ones they just scroll right past. And this is actually highly valuable information, because when you put it into these machine learning processes, you get very good predictions about what somebody who likes that kind of media and that kind of content and follows that kind of link is likely to do in the future, including what they're likely to buy. And so this is then important to notice, right? That the attention economy is governed by algorithm and machine learning, and that this then is the new kind of gatekeeper, if you will, or the new structuring device. And so this is not just a wide open, wild public sphere. It is also one structured in an alternative way. Finally, just to note, this is not technology alone, right? That there are other things that are affecting our public sphere, obviously. We have had mistrusts of elites, we've had partisan polarization, we've had declining participation in politics, we've had growing disenchantment with a hyper-commercialized society, all of that independent from the new media technology, but it does seem to be reinforced by this new media technology, amplified it and accelerated. So this is a diagram I've shared with you before. I hope it makes sense, but I'll just reiterate for a moment. This is my idea, that we could array on a spectrum different degrees of openness of a modern mediatized public sphere, the kind of public sphere we have, openness to ordinary people's communication and contributions, right? And so what we have in Russia today, right, is a public sphere where if you call the invasion of the Ukraine a war, you can go to jail, right? The government completely controls. China has a great firewall, which basically makes it impossible to freely communicate anything that is critical of the government. It has a 5-cent army that drowns out any critical post. And so obviously that's not healthy for either the reproduction of knowledge. And one of the things that is characteristic, going back to Hannah Arendt's wonderful treatment of totalitarianism, of this kind of public sphere, is it's just very hard for people to think. We rely for our capacity to construct an adequate sense of reality on getting our ideas confirmed by others, but we also rely on networks that get us accurate and reliable information. And in a highly manipulated public sphere in which the state controls all transmission of information and instrumentalizes it to maintain its power, you don't have that minimum but extraordinarily important precondition of the free exchange of ideas and information. You could also move a little bit further away from there and get to where perhaps the United States was in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, before the digital revolution occurred, with corporate control over the main media outlets, these media outlets being one to many, right? My friend Andrew Rosenthal controls what comes out in the New York Times, not literally by himself, right? But basically, if you want to reach the public, you have to go through that narrow bottleneck. And that means that the vast majority of us are only media consumers, not media producers. And the gatekeepers, by the way, work for commercial enterprises that are trying to profit. And so they're going to funnel the public information not only into that which agrees with their understanding of the mainstream consensus of allowable political opinion, legitimate public opinion, but they're also going to take into account what is most likely to widen their readership and increase their advertising revenue. We can move further along the spectrum to a public sphere in which the people who are given the limelight, the ability to disseminate their ideas, are experts, are knowledgeable, have specific qualifications, but they are also listening to what ordinary people have to say, what their interests are, what their concerns are, what their needs are, and recognize that unless they have their antenna out, unless they're committed both to listening to what ordinary people say and to translating their knowledge and their expertise into terms that are open to ordinary people, they're really not going to be able to do their job, either in the construction of reliable shared knowledge or in informing public opinion in a democracy. And so there's a kind of professional ethics of journalists and experts that requires not only that they verify their information, but also that they listen to ordinary people and tailor their address so that it is acceptable to ordinary people. A fourth stage on this continuum looks at the idea of a public sphere that is still more open, in which ordinary people don't have to rely on catching the ear or the attention of an expert, but instead are able to themselves directly contribute to public conversation. I want to say that the first decade of the World Wide Web, in which opinion mainly moved through blogs, and in which there wasn't yet commercially successful social media technology, looked maybe like this. And I think one of the big questions as we begin to think about the kinds of regulations and norms that we might want to adapt to this new technological environment is, can we get to what might be the ideal form of openness, somewhere maybe between 3 and 4, experts still turn to for their expertise, but ordinary people also able to broadcast their genuine ideas, concerns, insights, interests, without slipping into 5, right? And 5 is the far point on the spectrum: flooded, distracted, cognitively overloaded, and unreliable information system. The metaphor that's often used for this is drinking from the fire hose. There's so much information that if you try to tap it all, you're going to drown. And by the way, it's such a morass of good and bad information with very little distinguishing the good from the bad, right? It all looks the same. It all sounds the same. Oftentimes the stuff that is mis or disinformation is packaged so that it seems highly credible. How do we navigate the flooded, distracted, overloaded, unreliable public sphere? Well, we use these shortcuts. I'll only listen to opinion that sounds like what I already believe. I'll only stick with my tribe, my camp. And there are other things. Maybe I'll shut down, maybe I'll just tune out. And if we take those strategies, then both the knowledge system and public discourse suffer, right? And so to present these same ideas in a slightly different form, right? This is a too little and too much of a good thing curve, an upside down or inverted U curve, where the right movement is from a public sphere that's very closed down to one that's more open to one that's wide open. And the degree of deliberativeness and responsiveness to public opinion goes up as the public sphere gets more open to ordinary people's inputs, less censored or channeled by commercial concerns or state interests, to a point. And right, so we've got a plateau here, an ideal level of openness, and then it goes back down as too much information, unreliable information, overwhelms our capacity to understand, process, and learn from public deliberation, right? So with that as a guidepost, I now want to drill down on some of the literature. Some of this stuff is familiar, at least to the degree that you remember stuff I spoke with you about 6 months or a year ago. Some of it may be new. And I want to start, and so this is literature that looks in a more empirical way at the nature of knowledge transmission and opinion formation in our new networked public spheres. And I think for today, I'll probably concentrate on Kellen O'Connor and James Owen Weatherall's The Misinformation Age, How False Beliefs Spread. And these are two philosophers of science, right? So they're interested in particular in how bad ideas get transmitted in science, or to put it the other way around, how when scientific networks are working in a way that is functional for scientific knowledge and opinion formation, good new ideas eventually triumph over bad old ideas, right? And so what O'Connor and Weatherall do is they diagram different kinds of networks, right? And I don't want to go too far into this, but a cycle, as they call it, is one where you have a bunch of isolated researchers who are basically in communication with one or two other researchers, but not highly interconnected. A star is one where you have a bunch of independent researchers, but they're connected by a central individual or node who puts them all in touch with each other. And so in a sense, how good or bad he is or she is at transmitting information is going to matter a great deal to how well the people on the spokes of the wheel do. This, on the other hand, is really a wheel. And here you've got, right, much more intercommunication, everybody connected through the hub, but also connected at least to a couple other people on the wheel, and then complete interconnection, right? And so I hope you can see varying degrees to which knowledge can be transmitted between different researchers based on the channels of communication open between them. And then they focus on, and we're going to drill down on this, what they call clumpy communication, right? So this group of, I guess it's 6, and this group of 6, right, are tightly interconnected with each other, but loosely connected across their two clumps. And in particular, depending upon how, let's call these two the gatekeepers between this 6 and the other 6, how good or bad the gatekeepers are at either transmitting the information from the other group, or alternatively filtering that information to suit their paradigm or their interests, that's going to make a big difference in terms of how everybody else in their clumpy network learns from or doesn't learn from another research community. And so then they model in particular how it is that eventual persuasion and convergence on a new idea occurs, right? And so in this diagram with this kind of network, you have two people who are the black dots here, right? come across a new idea, a new theory, and it is at the outset the dissident, the new idea, right? And so the majority of members in their network don't believe the new theory, they believe something else. Some of them quite confidently, right? 0.43 is their level of confidence. Some of them not very confidently at all, 0.02. And so over time, these two succeed in persuading other people in their network to the point where almost everybody in the network has strong confidence in the new theory. If the new theory is correct, and that's the assumption here, then that is a successful use of a scientific network to confirm a new and more powerful theory. This, on the other hand, is a polarized or clumpy or cliquish network, right? In which this group has high confidence in the right theory, but the two people who connect this other group to this group have high confidence in the wrong theory. And even though other people in their network have very little confidence in the wrong theory, they don't hear from this other community. And this, by the way, is very much, I think, what the American public sphere looks like today. Not quite so simplified, right? But if you're watching Fox News or if you're watching CNN, you have pretty segregated or cliquish information networks. And that is where I want to pick up next week in terms of looking at the empirics of it. But I want to add one more thing from O'Connor and Weatherall today, and that has to do with something that I think is extremely important in their model, which is how propaganda spreads in networks of opinion formation. And so on this model, and remember, O'Connor and Weatherall are interested in scientific opinion formation. And so they're thinking in particular of two examples. The first is the idea that the consumption of tobacco, smoking, cigarettes in particular causes cancer, right? And the fact that American medical research understood this 20 or 30 years before American policymakers actually took effective legislation to try to discourage younger people from smoking and to try to make it clear what the associated health risks are. And the other example they're thinking of course, is the fact that for 50 years we've known that the emission of heat trapping gases into our environment would and has and will continue to heat the planet, and that will unleash potentially catastrophic consequences at a global level, global scale. And yet our policymakers continue to drag their feet. And when we may all deeply regret and bemoan the delay in processing the scientific information and generating effective policy on that basis. Why does that happen? And here is where this model comes to bear. It's not just that there's a propagandist paid by the relevant industry to persuade policymakers, perhaps by even funding their campaigns, but also by funding commercials and supporting public opinion formation to make it more difficult to legislate in ways that regulate the particular sector of the economy that is in need of regulation to avoid the health risks or the catastrophic climate change. It's also that the propagandists and the industry actually fund the work of and support scientists who hope to muddy the water, the so-called merchants of doubt. And that when those scientists are given funding by the relevant industry, they may do research that doesn't comport with the research of the more independent and impartial scientists, and this may help to give cover to the policymakers who are resisting the new regulation supported by the new learning and the new knowledge. I think that's just a really important thing to have in mind as we begin then next week to think about not just these abstract models, but how it is that actual opinion formation is working in the 21st century in our networked public sphere, and what's happening with our knowledge and our public opinion, but also how this technology is changing us as people, as emotional beings, as thinking beings. And I do want to get into that as well to further give us a full background for thinking about how to begin to maybe regulate this technology informally in terms of how we use our own capacities to say this is what I will and won't do with this technology, but also politically in terms of what kinds of policies we should be putting in place as we grapple with this major revolution in communication technology. I'll stop there. I'm guessing people have comments or thoughts. And by the way, Amy has told me we don't have to stop at 55 minutes exactly. So we got time. Who wants to start today? John, go ahead. You're still muted, John.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, there you go. Good.
I wasn't going to particularly say this, but it does seem to me that when we're making, I totally agree with your argument. I think it's put very well. It's a good analysis, but for this audience in particular, it really has to be remembered at all times that although the examples we draw on are mostly from the right wing and Republicans and whatever, from the point of view of a relatively respectable place like the Wall Street Journal editorial page, for example, they're extremely conservative, very anti-Trump, and they write endlessly about the exact opposite thing about how much of the media is dominated by a progressive left-wing perspective that colors everything and covers all sorts of news coverage, not just the editorial opinions, but what gets covered in the news. I mean, for example, the New York Times for a long time, unless they absolutely have to, will never identify a perpetrator of a crime as being African American. It can only seem to be it's not that you can't ever find it, but there are many cases where, I mean, racial politics is a big thing in the United States, and to know what's going on, you have to have some sense of what's going on, of what the facts of things are, and it's a relevant fact. If some guy is killed, is he killed by a white person? Is he killed by a black person? Is not an irrelevant piece of information to people, but it won't be in the paper. I mean, that's a very small example, but there are lots of examples. Reading the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal every day is kind of eye-opening. It's often appalling, but a lot of times you read it and you say, boy, they sure got that right, you know? So we just have to say that here, I think, because it's so easy to fall into the dichotomized thinking, and the people on the left side are nowhere near as nutty and evil as the people on the right. I don't want to say that, but nonetheless, in terms of the discourse, I think that also I have one minor factual matter.
Yeah.
Walter Benjamin.
Yeah.
Did not die in the concentration camp. He committed suicide in France, in northern Spain, when he was trying to flee the Nazis from Paris, and he couldn't get into Spain. So he took morphine and killed himself at age 48.
Thank you, John, and with apologies, yes, and you're absolutely right about that, and
Well,
so
it's Wikipedia. It's Wikipedia that's right. Speaking of the Google.
yeah, and I was moving too fast and playing too loose with the details. He died trying to escape the Nazis, not at the hands of the Nazis.
Yes.
But let me come back to your central point, which sure. and I have another thing I want to say about this, and so maybe two things actually, but one of them is, I think if and I've been doing more research on this topic recently, and one of the ways it's framed I find particularly useful is to suggest that for a long time there was a sustained, I want to say, centrist liberal bias to the mainstream American media, and that many conservatives had a very hard time when the big three networks dominated our mass media public sphere, getting much airtime at all outside of the Sunday morning talk shows sometimes in the 70s and 80s, right? But prior to that, and except for that one narrow outlet, many conservatives were correct in claiming that they were marginalized or shut out of mainstream media. And this in part is then the context in which Fox Media grows up. But I think it's also fair to say that when the Wall Street Journal says this in 2022, in a sense, it's mainly relying on that earlier period that has been superseded now for 20 years. Fox News is the most watched broadcast station in the United States, right? And so that's point number one, is that it's accurate until it's no longer accurate to say that there's a bias in the media system overall. And if anything, it seems to me that at least in the most watched outlet, the bias is the opposite. And you can actually do the stuff that PolitiFact and others do, which is to look at the ideological bias of different outlets and how much time different outlets give to different perspectives. And Fox gives almost no time to liberals, right? And the second thing I want to say, and it comes to your specific example, and here I just think we have to be careful again. So, how much crime is committed in the United States by African Americans, right? And it turns out that it's basically, as far as we can tell, and we have really bad data on crime. We're not good at a society at collecting it, but as best we can tell, the level of criminality among African Americans and white Americans is pretty much the same proportionately, right? And there are many more white people in our society than there are Black people. And so the majority of crime, and by the way, the majority of people in prison, majority of crime committed by whites, the majority of people in prison are white. You watch local news, and again, there are people who actually, chart the number of minutes in the 30-minute broadcast that is dedicated to covering crime by Black people, especially crime by Black people where the victim is a white person. And it is highly disproportionate to the incidence of that kind of crime in our society, right? And so I don't want to say that the New York Times doesn't, and for lack of a better word, whitewash some of its crime journalism, right? But I do want to say that when the Wall Street Journal makes that accusation, it's choosing to look at one rather narrow slice of a much more complex media system that has biases that go in the other direction as well. Thank you, John. And as always, I appreciate the correction, even if it comes from Wikipedia. And by the way, I think one of the examples of the way in which our technological system is transforming our access to information is Wikipedia. And although I don't let my students use it exclusively, I don't tell them they can't use it because it is a good resource, and it's fun to see how quickly we can come up to speed on things as a result of, and for those of you who don't know, Wikipedia is not an expert-based system, right? It's not like the Encyclopedia Britannica where they would get a Walter Benjamin scholar to write the entry on Walter Benjamin. It is, quote, crowdsourced. Anybody who wants to can contribute to it, but then the contributions have to gain enough support from the users and the people who consider themselves to know something about Walter Benjamin for it to actually be published by Wikipedia. So a new form of information creation, and I think it has small d democratic potential. That's where we're going in part, is how to encourage that use of this new technology while discouraging the transmission and amplification of disinformation. Anybody else for today? All right, so I'll see you next week, and I'll wish you happy holidays then, but one of those holidays at least starts tomorrow. So I'm going to wish everybody happy holidays this week and next week. Take care of yourselves. I hope the lockdown doesn't last too long, and I look forward to seeing you and continuing the conversation in a week's time. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks again. Take care.